The room was quiet, bathed in the faint glow of moonlight seeping through the curtains. The air carried a stillness, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. I lay there, eyes shut, sinking into the kind of half-sleep where thoughts float freely, yet never settle. My husband, as always, was absent, both physically and emotionally. The hollow ache of his indifference had become my nightly companion. In the stillness, I found myself thinking about him, my stepson. A young man who'd recently returned home, his presence lingered like an unspoken question in the air. There was nothing overt, nothing tangible to grasp, yet something about the way he looked at me unsettled me. His gaze carried a weight, a quiet intensity that I couldn't quite decipher. Was it curiosity? Judgment? Or something else entirely? I shifted under the covers, the cool fabric brushing against my skin, grounding me momentarily. My mind wandered back to earlier that evening. He had been unusually quiet at dinner, his eyes flitting toward me when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd caught him once, and he'd looked away quickly, his face betraying a flicker of discomfort, or was it guilt? I dismissed it as my imagination, a product of my restless mind. The house was silent now, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak, every whisper of movement. It was a sound I had grown accustomed to, the sound of being alone, even in a house full of people. My husband had long ago stopped sharing my bed, retreating to his own world of work, obligations, and excuses. And so, I had learned to find solace in the quiet, in the spaces he left behind. But tonight felt different. There was an unease, a tension I couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was the weight of my own thoughts, pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. Or perhaps it was the awareness of him, my stepson, in the room down the hall, separated by nothing more than a thin wall and a closed door. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, to escape the endless cycle of questioning and doubt. But even as my body stilled, my mind refused to follow. There was a part of me, deep, hidden, and shameful, that found his presence intriguing. It was a fleeting thought, one I quickly pushed away, burying it under layers of rationality and propriety. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, that fleeting thought lingered, growing roots in the fertile soil of my loneliness. I told myself it was nothing, just the imaginings of a restless mind seeking distraction. But in the silence of the night, even the smallest whispers of desire can feel deafening. The faint creak of the door stirred me from the edge of sleep. My body froze instinctively, my breaths shallow, as I listened closely. It wasn't the sound of the wind or the settling of the house, it was deliberate, measured. Someone was in the room. My heart quickened, but I kept my eyes shut, unsure of how to react. The soft sound of footsteps brushed against the carpet, moving closer. I could feel the presence now, an energy distinct and unmistakable. The room felt smaller, as though the air had thickened, pressing against my skin. It wasn't fear I felt, it was something else entirely, a charged mix of curiosity and apprehension. I knew it was him before I even opened my eyes. There was no need for confirmation, his presence was unmistakable. He hesitated, the sound of his movement stalling just a few feet away. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I lay perfectly still, feigning sleep. What was he doing here? Why now, in the dead of night? The silence stretched on, heavy and tense. I could feel his gaze on me, studying, lingering. It wasn't the fleeting glance of the dinner table, it was something more deliberate, something that made the air crackle between us. A part of me wanted to confront him, to break the oppressive quiet, but another part, stronger, bolder, wanted to see what he would do next. He moved closer, his shadow shifting across the dim light that filtered through the curtains. I could sense his hesitation, as though he were caught between impulse and restraint. The weight of his indecision hung in the air, tangible and thick. My skin prickled with awareness, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, as if testing the waters, he whispered my name. It was soft, barely audible, but it sent a shiver through me nonetheless. The sound of it, so intimate, so unexpected, made my breath hitch involuntarily. I cursed myself for the reaction, for the way my body betrayed me, but I couldn't stop the wave of heat that followed. I didn't respond, keeping my breathing even, though I knew he must have noticed the subtle shift in my demeanor. He stayed there, unmoving, his presence a silent question I didn't know how to answer. The longer the moment stretched, the more the tension built, an invisible thread pulling taut between us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard him take a step back. His retreat was slow, deliberate, as though he were giving me one last chance to acknowledge him, to shatter the fragile line we were towing. But he stayed silent, rooted in place, even as the door creaked softly behind him. When he was gone, the air in the room felt lighter, but my chest was heavy with a confusing swirl of emotions. Relief, guilt, curiosity, and something darker, more dangerous, that I dared not name. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing as the night stretched on. The next night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The silence of the house seemed heavier, more charged. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, every sound amplifying my restless thoughts. I told myself it was nothing, just a lingering unease from the previous night. But deep down, I knew better. I heard the door again, that same quiet creak as it opened. This time, I didn't freeze. My body tensed, but I kept my breathing steady, waiting. His footsteps were softer now, almost cautious, as though he were testing the boundaries of his own audacity. The faint shuffle stopped near the edge of the bed, and I felt the familiar weight of his gaze settle on me. This time, he didn't hesitate as long. He said my name again, barely above a whisper, but it carried more certainty, as though he expected me to respond. My pulse raced, but I kept my eyes closed. He shifted closer, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight as he perched at the edge. "Are you awake?" His voice was low, steady, but laced with a vulnerability that caught me off guard. I opened my eyes, slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dim, his face partially obscured by the shadows, but I could see enough to read the uncertainty in his expression. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, as though searching for the right words. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," he admitted, the weight of his confession hanging heavily in the air. His honesty startled me, but it also struck a chord deep within me, one I had tried to ignore for far too long. The tension that had been building between us, unspoken and unacknowledged, now stood bare between us. "This isn't right," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. My mind screamed at me to send him away, to put an end to this before it spiraled out of control. But my body betrayed me, rooted in place, unable to look away from him.